Well, hello my wonderful fans, it's the BC Andrews Critiquer. Well, seeing how we're getting close to Easter, I thought I would review a story based on the crucifixion and resurrection of our Savior, albeit very loosely, that of course being The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Okay, so here's the scoop. World War II's just hit, and 4 siblings called Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy are evacuated to the country along with the rest of London's half-pints for their safety, and are dumped with this stern but kind-hearted old guy who has a wardrobe that turns out leads to an enchanted parallel universe called Narnia, which is currently being ruled by the White Witch in the absence of its rightful ruler Aslan, and is in a state of eternal winter but no Christmas from her reign. And I thought Elsa was harsh. The youngest one, Lucy, is the first to discover this bizarre winter wonderland and meets a faun called Mr. Tumnus, who's supposed to turn any human into the witch to keep the prophecy of 4 humans coming to Narnia, bringing back Aslan and ending her reign from coming true. But he finds he just likes her too much and lets her go. But when he gets busted thanks to the big mouth of Edmund, the siblings must save Mr. Tumnus, bring back Aslan, and end the witch's reign forever. But things get even more complicated when Edmund decides to sell siblings out to the witch for candy, which by Narnia code makes him the witch's slave for his treachery. So is all lost for Narnia when Aslan offers himself in Edmund's place? So yeah, you'd think a retelling of the crucifixion of Jesus as a fantasy would seem ungodly corny, no pun intended, but this story has been a staple in fantasy literature ever since it was first published in 1950, enjoyed by many people, both religious and not. And a lot of people are familiar with Disney's big-budget action-packed adaptation from 2005, and the 1988 miniseries has a decent cult following, even if it is much lower budget to be polite, even for TV. Ugh. But effects alone aren't what make a good story, so I've decided to go over these 2 adaptations and find out which one is better. So let's journey into the wardrobe so I can prophesize my opinions on these 2 movies. This is Old vs. New, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. As you probably know, the prophecy said that 4 humans would sit in the thrones and assume the title of rulers of Narnia, and similarly, only 4 humans may assume the title of winner of this round, so now I have to determine which set of siblings is better. So let's take a look at Best Pevensie Siblings. Apparently, the casting directors of the 2005 film went through hundreds of auditions before making their final selection for the main kids, and let me just say, it was well worth the effort. The child actors in the Disney film were so realistic as siblings dealing with the stress of World War II without their parents. William Moseley and Anna Popplewell are perfect as the oldest siblings trying to be good parental substitutes for their little brother and sister, but with little patience for their antics.
Why can't you got anyone but yourself? You're so selfish. You could have got us killed.
Stop it!
They also often bicker like an old couple, which not only makes for some good laughs, but also convincingly shows the stress these 2 are going through with having to play parents at such a young age. Skander Keynes does really well at being the cocky middle child Edmund who takes pleasure in tormenting Lucy and always wants everything to go his way, but also convincingly shows that his sullenness is from feeling unappreciated by his family and also being uncomfortable with his older siblings taking on the role of his parents.
You think you're dumb, but you're not!
And Georgie Henley hits bullseye as the cute, charismatic youngest sibling Lucy trying to brighten her siblings up in these miserable times, but even she has her limits, and as you might expect, these siblings' chemistry is really upped when they have to deal with this new pressure of saving Narnia. The child actors in the mini-series, it saddens me to say, never convinced me for a second that they were siblings. For one thing, they're all too close in age to convincingly convey the roles of the family these characters are supposed to have. Hell, the actors of Peter and Edmund are both the same age. I think the issues with that speaks for itself. And acting-wise, the only one that really stood out was Jonathan Scott as Edmund, who may not convey the middle child stress of the character that well, but nails the selfish, cocky asshole aspect.
It's not Susan come to find you, it's me, Edmund.
What's the matter with her?
That's the worst of these young kids.
The rest of the kids are decent actors, but it seems like they're just going through the motions without the dedication the ones in the new film had, with a couple prominent exceptions here and there. But yeah, no contest overall. The ones in the Disney film just play the role so much better. Point goes to the new.
Of all the poisonous little beasts.
First off, welcome to my brand new apartment. I just moved in a week ago and I'm loving every bit of this wonderful place. Anyway, when you're trying to save a country from a dictatorship, you need the best support possible, and the villain needs the best support possible to preserve said dictatorship. So why don't we see which set of support was more reliable with Best Supporting Cast. Now keep in mind, I'm not judging these characters based on the effects offered, because if I did, it would be no contest at all, the new would win, but I think that would be kind of an unfair advantage, seeing how Disney had much more time, money, and advanced effects for their movie. Sure, the effects of the miniseries could have looked better, even with the budget they had, but I still don't think it's a fair comparison. So I'm only going to be judging these characters based on their writing and performances, not on how believable they look. But before that, let's start with the Professor, played by Michael Aldridge and Jim Broadbent. Both do well at being the eccentric but wise voice of fantastical reason to the kids, but I think I like Broadbent's portrayal a little more. Granted, he doesn't have as much screen time as Aldridge, but he just had a bit more of a sweet old grandfatherly nature to him, which made the few scenes he did have more endearing.
She's your sister, isn't she? You're a family. You might just try acting like one.
The new film also expands on a few of the minor characters' roles a bit, like the housekeeper who appears twice for like 10 seconds in the original is fleshed out as a strict tightwad with a small soft spot in the Disney film. And the fox who gets petrified by the witch is turned into a badass resistance fighter voiced by Rupert Everett. I also like how they portray Father Christmas in the Disney film. The one in the miniseries is just the traditional Santa Claus portrayal, which isn't necessarily bad, but the one in the Disney film is portrayed more like a kind-hearted, wise old wizard, and you really feel his gentle but empowering nature.
These are tools, not toys. Bear them well and wisely.
But now let's look at the more prominent side characters. The Beavers are kind of a tie for me. Both incarnations make good comic reliefs, but also have a few good words of wisdom to say. How about the Witch's Captain of the Guards, Morgred? I actually like the 88 one better. The 2005 one is just the brutish, humorless muscle for the villain, but the one in the miniseries is portrayed more like a smug sadist, which I found more enjoyable to watch. Plus, his fight scene with Peter is pretty intimidating. The White Witch's right-hand little person is kind of under the same boat. The Disney one is a bit more vicious and violent, but I lean a bit more towards the cocky, smug one in the miniseries. That's just my own preference though. Anyway, for me the big deciding point is Mr. Tumnus, and again, I favor the miniseries version. Jeffrey Perry really captures the jolly and eccentric nature of Tumnus in his performance and is the kind of guy you'd feel totally safe having a kid go visit for tea, which makes when he gets petrified all the more sad. James McAvery's Mr. Tumnus is not as cheery. I mean, he's still kind and loves Lucy, but he seems a bit sullen and introverted, an issue I also had when McAvery played Hazel in the Netflix version of Watership Down. Either way, he just wasn't as fun to watch as Perry's version. It is a bit of a toss-up, but since I like the more prominent side characters in the miniseries better, I'm going to give the original the point on this one. Point goes to the old.
And I'm afraid you've had a very poor sampling.
And now for our villainess, and this is a big one considering she's an allegory for the most evil being in existence. Well, I can see some parallels with him too, but I'm actually talking about the devil, so let's see which one Bear captured the wrath and manipulation of Lucifer with. Best white bitch. I mean white witch. Nah, she really is a bitch. Now this one was the hardest for me to pick out because both portrayals of the White Witch, or Jadis, are very good in their own special ways. In terms of which one is more memorable, that's hands down Barbara Kellerman in the original. Almost every second she's on screen, she's just chewing the scenery in the most hilariously over-the-top way imaginable.
How dare you come alone? Aslan! What? He has not been here! He cannot have been here! As the law states, the whole of Narnia will be overturned!
I swear, this woman could out-ham John Travolta, Nicolas Cage, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sylvester Stallone, Tim Curry, Jack Nicholson, and my dad all combined. If this woman doesn't have you laughing like crazy, nothing will. But in terms of which one is the better allegory of Satan, Tilda Swinton's portrayal would probably come a little closer. It's kind of like the nostalgia critics' comparison of the Karate Kid villains. The original is a ton of fun to watch, but they're just too goofy to take seriously. Swinton nailed all of the traits associated with the devil. She was ruthless, cold-blooded, sadistic, scary, and she could be very over the top as well, but it came off as intimidating rather than funny.
How dare you come alone? The great cat is dead!
I also like how she turns her victims to stone with a magic sword instead of a magic wand in this version. That just gives an even darker edge to the character. But at the same time, she also captures the devil's convincing manipulation when she's tempting Edmund with the promise of being a prince and a bunch of Turkish delight if he brings his siblings to her. Even if you're not religious, I'm sure most of you know that the reason the devil is so dangerous is that he's able to seem so genuine and appealing when he's tempting us, preying upon our weaknesses and anxieties to trick us into doing evil things. Sadly, Kellerman seems about as genuine as a creepy guy in a van when she's tempting Edmund, but Swinton is able to be convincingly motherly and sweet, like the first person who's ever shown Edmund genuine appreciation, even though it wasn't actually genuine in the slightest. The witch also preys upon Edmund's weaknesses more in the new film, specifically his ego. Like in the original, the White Witch says she'll make his siblings dukes and duchesses when he brings them to her. But in the Disney film, she says she'll make them his servants. She knew how Edmund really felt pushed around and unappreciated by his siblings and used that weakness to manipulate him like a puppet. Again, it was a very tough call, and I still frickin' love Kellerman's completely over-the-top performance in the miniseries, but C.S. Lewis's intent for the character was to be a serious allegory of Satan, and Kellerman's performance, fun as it is, was just too silly to convincingly pull that off. Though she did remind me a bit of South Park's portrayal of the devil. Swinton's version felt much more like a Satan satire, with her cold-blooded sadism and sneaky manipulation, which is why I'm giving Disney the point on this one. Point goes to the new.
Say you are lying, and you shall even now be forgiven.
But now let's move from the darker religious allegories to the more lighthearted ones, specifically for our Savior Jesus Christ. So will this attempt from Disney to show a CGI photorealistic lion on screen prove more successful than their latest attempt? Ugh. Well, let's find out with Best Aslan. Again, this is not taking into account the effects because it would be outrageously unfair if I did. So which one is better? Again, it's a toughie because I really do like both versions. They're both wise, empowering, majestic, and kind-hearted, all traits displayed by Jesus. But I think what people remember about him the most was his loving nature. I mean, sure, he could be tough and bold sometimes, but when people think of Jesus, the first thing that usually comes to mind is soft and gentleness. Liam Neeson sounds like, well, Liam Neeson. His voice may be perfect for a majestic lion leader, but not for an allegory of the Son of God. I mean, imagine Liam Neeson's voice coming from a direct representation of Jesus. And Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and don't get in their way, for the kingdom of God is theirs as much as yours." I can't do a good Liam Neeson, but that's beside the point. I'm not saying Neeson's Aslan is unlikable, not in the slightest. He's still kind-hearted and wise, but he just doesn't feel especially gentle and sweet.
I know, dear one, but that only makes the betrayal all the worse. What's done is done. There is no need to speak to Edmund about what is past. Do not cite the deep magic to me, witch. I was there when it was written.
Ronald Pickup's performance in the original was perfect in my eyes. He displayed the power and majesty you'd expect from a Lion King, no pun intended, but he still had a very loving and gentle nature to him as well.
Welcome, Peter, son of Adam. Welcome, Susan and Lucy, daughters of Eve. All shall be done. Do I look like it? I feel it is time for a roar. You'd better put your fingers in your ears.
Even the animatronic used for the character, though very fake looking, still leaves more of a gentle impact. Hell, just look at how Aslan brings petrified victims back to life in both movies. In the Disney film, he just roars, but in the original, he breathes a soft but spiritual-esque breath, making it feel more like a miracle of Jesus. Again, both versions are very good, but Pickup's more loving performance just worked better as a Jesus allegory than Neeson's more, well, Neeson-esque performance. Point goes to the old.
You doubt the prophecy?
Once again, it's all tied up, so to determine which fantasy retelling of the crucifixion of Jesus has the final nudge, we'll have to look at Best Story. This is Story for the Win. If you've read the original book, then you probably know that the miniseries was as faithful to it as possible. Other than a few lines and segments being slightly shortened, the film is basically a scene-for-scene visual representation of the novel. Disney stayed fairly faithful to the book as well, but they also added a relative amount of new scenes and lines of dialogue. But did these new scenes help strengthen the story? For the most part, they certainly did. Like, there's a cold opening where the Pevensies are trying to survive a bombing in London before they're taken to the country that's not only very dramatic, but also gives us a nice introduction to the characteristics of these siblings. We see Edmund enamored by the whole thing, foreshadowing his more sociopathic tendencies, but we also see him running from the bomb shelter to get a photo of their pop from the house, indicating he does still have a soft side even if he is pretty reckless. We see Peter and Susan trying to fiercely protect their little brother and sister, but also their stress from the responsibility and their sibling stubbornness.
Why can't you just do as you're told?
Lucy Sally doesn't do much in this scene but cry and act scared, but the rest of the siblings are introduced to us rather effectively. And even though the more fleshed out minor characters weren't quite enough to win the Best Supporting Cast round, they did still make certain scenes more powerful. Like, let's look in more detail about when the witch turns the fox and those other creatures to stone. In the mini-series, she stumbles across them having a Christmas feast courtesy of Father Christmas and turned them to stone really out of bitterness that her magic was weakening. Yeah, it sucks, but we barely know these characters, so it's not as gut-wrenching as it could have been. But again, the fox is turned into a cocky but kind-hearted resistance fighter, and after seeing many scenes of him guiding the protagonists and standing up to the enemies, it was pretty tragic when we see him turn into stone. Hell, the reason the witch did it was because he wouldn't tell her where the humans were. That's what I call going out with dignity. As for the other animals that are turned into stone, we learn that they were Mr. Beaver's friends and were petrified trying to protect him from the witch's guards. Even that little extra detail makes their petrification more gut-wrenching.
He was my best mate.
Even the more tidbit moments, like the scene where the witch reveals to Mr. Tumnus that it was Edmund who turned him in, really do leave an impact, not just on account of their drama, but also towards helping the main characters grow on their journey. I also like the visual style in the Disney adaptation more, not just because of how more realistic it looks, but also because of how it's executed. Like, just look at the expressions of those who have been petrified. Either it was very painful or they were turned to stone while stoned. Aslan's crucifixion is also much more intense in the Disney version. Sure, the BBC one was pretty scary as well, but the new one is basically a PG version of the crucifixion in The Passion of Christ. Not to mention, we have a pretty awesome battle scene shortly after, and not just a bunch of people sword fighting. But the heartfelt imagery is also really effective. Like, let's look at when Aslan is resurrected in both movies. In the original, when Susan and Lucy find the stone table broken and Aslan missing, Aslan reveals he's right behind them and we have a sweet reunion scene. That's heartwarming alright, but in the Disney film, when Lucy and Susan are wondering where Aslan went, he reveals himself standing at the very top of a pillar above the table, with light shining upon him in a very reminiscent manner of when Jesus rose from the dead. I know this round's been pretty one-sided, so I just want to make clear the BBC adaptation is still a good movie overall, even without these additional scenes, just like the original book was. But as we know, more faithful doesn't always mean better, and sometimes adding to the source material really does improve it. And this is just one of those cases, not just with the drama and characters, but also towards satirizing the original crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus, which is why I have to give this final point to Disney. Point goes to the new, in my opinion, the superior movie.
Look here, shut up!
And that's all I got. Join me next time when I examine a few more movies that prove my claim about how more faithful doesn't always mean better with Best Improved Endings of Roald Dahl Adaptations. Bye guys!